that I'm presenting today is, as I said, co-authored by James Suter, and the core question is, what are the ends or goals of deliberation about climate change? Is it getting the facts right or increasing participants' reflectiveness or empathy? And or both. Just to give you a brief overview of the paper that we're still working on and of this presentation as well. I'm first going to say a couple of things about the context and the groundworks and concepts we're working with. So about climate change deliberation and the citizen assemblies about climate change in the past years. Then about deliberation's function to correct misperception and the epistemic merits of deliberation that additionally exists. Then about climate change policy as a complex political issue, and about reflectiveness as a goal of deliberation. And then pose the question, what are actually the ends or goals of deliberation? John and Simon may notice the ends of deliberation, the quote as a title. So in the second part, I'm going to go a bit more into detail about the research design. So I'm going to address participants' reflectiveness and their judgment's accuracy about climate change-related issues, pre- and post-climate change deliberation. First, I'm going to propose conceptualization of reflectiveness, then an operationalization and measurement of accuracy and reflectiveness that builds on the survey items that we have from the UCOME project, plus some complementary things that we, I think, need in order to sort of mirror and match the concept. And finally, give you a brief overview of the methods that we're going to apply as soon as we have all data collected. And last but not least, I'm going to give you a look ahead. I think this kind of analysis, there's some real potentials for future, not only for future research, but also for political practice and for designing and facilitating citizen assemblies or mini publics that deal with climate change and climate change policies. So, context and groundworks. Firstly, I think it's nothing entirely new to most of you joining here that there's a proliferation of climate change citizen assemblies and mini publics worldwide. Currently, at least since 2006, 2008 in Europe. And by now also the report of the Global Citizens Assembly is out that members of the center, among them Nicole Corrado, for example, co-authored or authored led. But there are also similar initiatives in different European countries, in Germany, in the UK, in Ireland, and so on. The data that we are collecting are from the aforementioned UCOME climate change project and from deliberative experiments in 5 European states that were conducted at a local, national, and supranational level in different stages and constellations. It's a bit of a complex setup, but it's not necessary here for the sake of this paper to understand all the stages of deliberation and so on. I guess this pre and post measure thing is here essential. So we have one measure before all participants participated in deliberations about climate change with different focal points, and then measures after all deliberations were conducted. So context point 2. So I guess deliberation has a very important function, an epistemic function, when it comes to correcting misperceptions about climate change, particularly because climate change politics is an area of politics where actors with West interests tend to utilize misperception-generating strategies and use that strategically in different media and on different platforms. And this epistemic function of deliberation that was particularly highlighted by epistemic deliberative Democrats is crucial here. So it assumes that deliberators at the end of the day are swayed by the force of the better argument, and that the deliberation can be a tool for counteraction to fight misperception-generating strategies that are spread, for example, by big fossil fuel companies and so on. So, last part of contextual deliberation. So, I guess one function is this epistemic function of deliberation. It is assumed by a large tradition of deliberative theory and research that deliberation has the potential to correct misperceptions, improve citizens' knowledge, that it is crucial when discourses are strongly influenced by vested interests, and also that the wisdom of the many, to quote Ella Landmer, can help us to achieve epistemically superior results. Another line of thinking doesn't assume that, or not, doesn't necessarily assume, I have to be a bit careful here, because of people in the room, doesn't necessarily assume that this is the main goal of deliberation, but that reflectiveness and mutual understanding are the primary goal of deliberative processes, and this can certainly come along with epistemic benefits or merits. So seeing the other side, to quote Muradova, or to create mutual understanding, Habermas' Einverständnis among opponents, is particularly crucial when no clear-cut consensus can be expected when it comes to highly contentious topics. I guess climate change can reasonably be assumed to be one of them, and climate change policies. And this is important, particularly when there is no one right or best solution for policy or policy change that can be that we can expect to achieve or agree upon. And there are either multiple options or that it's too polarized and contentious to arrive at one conclusion. So, and then again, this backdrop is also particularly important for complex political issues where facts, interests, and values all play a role. I guess climate change and policies are also a fairly good example for that. It's not only about facts at the end of the day, it's also about values, it's about interests. All these things play a role when it comes to deliberating about climate change policy and policy change. So, complex political issues in environmental politics, and I already said that, are essentially certainly a matter of facts, but the definition of the problem is as itself often a matter of dispute. It's a matter of values, it's a matter of interests, and it's also complex, twofold dimensions. So, John, I'm quoting you. Obviously, but I'm also quoting you in the paper, so I think it's legit. When human decision systems confront environmental problems, they encounter a twofold complexity. Ecosystems are complex, and our knowledge of them is limited, as the scientists who study them are the first to admit. Human social systems are complex too. Environmental problems, by definition, are found at the intersection of ecosystems and human social systems, but doubly complex. And in line with that, a communication scholar, Boykov, said in a context where it was more about communicating science, climate change science, we cannot just throw more facts at a problem, meaning climate change, that is not about facts at the end of the day, but about values and interests and so on. Yeah, so that's sort of the outline and the backdrop that I wanted to give you, or the background that I wanted to give you to introduce our research questions. And we think that studying the potential of citizen assemblies to correct misperceptions is important, but it is most likely not enough. So we also need to study the potential to increase reflectiveness, to see the other side, to create empathy, although I think empathy is not all of what reflectiveness is about, but that's a different discussion that we can maybe approach after the presentation. So, what is the puzzle? What are the core research questions? Previous findings and some puzzles. So when it comes to accuracy, interpersonal deliberation, and that was more or less demonstrated, I'm always a bit careful with that term, but by previous research, interpersonal deliberation can help correcting misperceptions and identifying misperception-generating political communication. So we can ask how to make these results matter in policy making and public administration, embed the scientific findings into better climate change policies. That's a helpful tool to solve the prevalent problem. We need a tool to solve the prevalent problem, and that is how to upscale this to the broader public sphere. That's always the issue, I guess. An issue that we're addressing in the Laureate project more than in this part of the paper, this part of the project. And then what designs are actually best equipped to counteract misperception-generating political communication? That's also sort of more a puzzle than a finding, because people tend to fight about that. The second point would be about reflectiveness. So interpersonal deliberation can help people to see the other side, to become more reflective. That's at least the result of several studies. But what's still up for dispute and what's still being debated is under what conditions are actually conducive to more reflectiveness, or to people becoming more reflective during deliberation. What particular deliberative designs are helpful for that? And what precisely are the causal mechanisms, like at a micro and at a macro level, that are at play when it comes to making people more reflective? So the main question that we want to address here in this paper is, what is the relationship between interpersonal deliberations' potential to improve accuracy and reflectiveness? To this aim, we have two overarching research questions. So the first research question is more the backdrop to have a starting point at all. What is a coherent account for conceptualizing and then measuring participants' reflectiveness on the basis of the data that we have from the UCAME project, which is a bit of a challenge. Looking forward to all suggestions here. And the second question is actually the overarching research question that we're mainly interested in, and that I also alluded to a couple of times. So we're asking, how does interpersonal deliberation affect the accuracy of people's judgments in the deliberative processes studied? How does it affect the reflectiveness in the processes studied? And how do accuracy and reflectiveness relate to each other at the end of the day? So, getting to the next point, what is our conceptualization of reflectiveness? I think empathy, as Lala Muradova and Michael Morel, for example, outline seeing the other side, putting yourself in each other's shoes, is a very good starting point, but at least for me, it doesn't capture everything that goes into reflectiveness, because it also has other components. And I'm going to outline what I mean by reflectiveness here in the next step. So first of all, as sort of a disclaimer, the primary goal of communicative exchange is not necessarily a rational consensus about what to do or finding a rational solution for the problem, but first and foremost, is the task of deliberators to find something like a mutual understanding, to put themselves in each other's shoes, to see the other side. And then it gets a bit tricky in terms of defining what that actually means. So participants can, when they are able to understand others' viewpoints, the way they have been socialized, the way they have developed their viewpoints and preferences and values, harmonize their plans of action to then cooperatively take action upon matters of common concern. That's at least Habermas statements. And particularly in situations that are characterized with deep and perennial political disagreements and concern complex issues, again, climate change is a good example, I guess, for that, participants must, on the one hand, scrutinize the assessment of the situation. That would be a more factual assessment. Then the values they hold and the rationals they apply to translate A and B, the assessment of the situation and the values into concrete action plans and policy preferences that are action guiding. This usually involves, and that is also Habermas explained, for example, the theory of communicative action, that you also have to reflect upon the way in which you and others may have formed your own values, preferences, viewpoints, and so on. So it's a deeper and then more complex process, actually, that needs to be facilitated to become reflective on these terms. And that's why I said empathy is a good proxy, but it's not, for me, it's not all what that needs to be captured. So much about concepts. I hope you can see that on the screen. I lost one of my contact lenses, so I'm half blind. So we have two items that are left in the You Can Meet survey that we will use. One is perspective-taking ability, the ability to see the other side, the disposition to put oneself in others' shoes. That's one element. They're all measured on Likert scales. And the second one is open-minded thinking. I'm just quoting here, and it's again like a scale. On the one hand, I avoid the company of people whose values, attitudes, or opinions are different from my own, whereas I prefer to discuss politics and society issues with people who are the same opinion as me. But not of the same opinion as me, sorry. Okay, and then our perspective was, okay, that's sort of an approximation to becoming reflective and seeing the other side, but it's definitely not capturing this more complex concept that we actually think is important when it comes to reflectiveness. So it's not just, okay, we have a fancy theoretical concept, but I think it's actually important to capture these more intricate processes as well when we really want to understand reflectiveness and what happened in those deliberative processes. So therefore, and we're still in the phase of data collection, or I think all the focus groups are over now, but we need to transcribe them and so on. You probably can imagine that takes some work. Anyway, at the end of the day, so what we now will do is to evaluate focus group interviews and code the responses of participants also on Likert scales. And particularly the responses that address reflectiveness. We added a couple of questions that from our perspective are important in order to understand how participants perceived these deliberative processes and how far their reflectiveness improved over the course of these processes. So the first question would be, in how far the deliberations enable you to better understand perspectives on climate change and corresponding policy preferences that diverge from your own perspective and or preferences? The second, in how far the deliberations enhance your understanding of the reasons and motives for your own policy preferences? Has this type of conversation changed your positions, and if so, and in which direction? Did deliberations enable you to better understand perspectives on climate change and corresponding policy preferences that diverge from your own perspective or preference? And the deliberations enhance your understandings of the reasons and motives for your own policy preference. So it's always about your own and the other's policy preferences and reasons and rationales applied. And I guess these aspects are important, and they I think it's also hard to cover that in surveys, but we hope to be able to draw that out of the focus group interviews and then code it on like scales to sort of be able to combine it with the survey items. So the measurement of accuracy and pre and post deliberation is a bit more straightforward and less complicated, I guess. And just fairly conventional, we have survey items that capture all of that fairly well. So there's one survey item about climate change misperceptions. If I wouldn't be talking in a scientific seminar, I would say absurd claims, partially, about climate change. One item is climate change misperceptions, one item is policies about environment too. So that's basically from the Eurobarometer on climate change policies, are climate change policies too costly at the end of the day? And then get a scale, we can evaluate that. And then the evaluation of participants, or if climate change policies are harmful and or ineffective. Then we have the priorities regarding fighting climate change. So this is a bit of a stretch, but I think it's important. Feel free to feedback me on that, but I think it's important looking a bit closer also at the survey items to see what do participants deem necessary or are willing to accept in terms of measures when it comes to sort of evaluating the consequences of climate change correctly. So that's not the direct measure of the accuracy of judgments, but it's very closely associated with the accuracy of judgments in that case. So, what are the goals of interpersonal deliberation, to get back to the main question? Some hypotheses or assumptions for the time being, methodological suggestions, and then finally I'm going to outline some analytical and political or practical merits. So our hypotheses and assumptions about the relationship between accuracy and reflectiveness that are also built on previous research that we would like to test, essentially, first of all, and just as a disclaimer, they don't all like sort of point into the same direction. We want to test them, but these are different hypotheses that emerge from previous research, and it would be interesting to see what actually holds up at the end of the day based on our data and in comparison to other literature. So the first hypothesis would be interpersonal deliberation is able to improve both reflectiveness and accuracy to an approximately equal extent. Possible? We don't know. The second, interpersonal deliberation is able to improve the accuracy of people's judgment to a significantly higher degree than their reflectiveness. Then the reverse. Interpersonal deliberation is able to improve participants' reflectiveness to a significantly higher degree than the accuracy of their judgments. And the last one is actually one that I find particularly interesting, that also emerged from one of Jane's previous studies, but it was a different case, a different scenario, and so on. And that is that there's a trade-off actually at the end of the day. Gaining knowledge, so improving the accuracy of judgments, correcting misperceptions, leads to a decline in her study, I think, in empathy, but this could also lead to a decline in reflectiveness and being able to understand the other side. You gain knowledge, you feel like you're an expert yourself. Why reflect upon the way other people form their judgments and all of that? So this trade-off would be particularly interesting for me and might also be particularly interesting for people designing deliberation, because then you would really have to think about what do you want to achieve and how can we achieve it. So I cannot see very well. I think the first part that is not in bold letters is not so important for the time being, anyways, because this is more the methodological pre-checks. So we have to check the scale construction. Some are from like a scale from 1 to 10 or one from 1 to 5. We need to do a factor analysis. So do different items for accuracy or reflectiveness, load on the same factor, for example, and so on, stuff like that. But in the next step, what we want to do, obviously, is to conduct pre- and post measures. Are there changes in accuracy and reflectiveness individually? In the first step, so that would basically be a correlation of pre- and post measures of accuracy and reflectiveness individually. And then finally to analyze the relationship between changes in accuracy and changes in reflectiveness, assuming they are there, but we strongly assume that there are some changes. Specifically, with regards to potential trade-offs, we are currently envisioning to calculate a delta correlation. So basically, we would subtract the accuracy value pre-deliberation from the accuracy value post-deliberation, correlate that with the with the same calculation for reflectiveness. So where we subtract the reflectiveness value for pre-deliberation from the reflectiveness value for post-deliberation. So it would basically be just calculating the difference, so the delta, and then correlate both, like how big is the delta and to what extent do they diverge. So this would allow us, assuming that there are differences between pre- and post measures in accuracy and reflectiveness, to get at least an overview about the question, is there a trade-off? In what relationship are changes in accuracy and changes in reflectiveness at the end of the day related, or in what way are they not related, and sort of vary independently of each other. I guess when we have a look ahead, this type of analysis and analyzing climate change deliberation and their effects came from a pretty theoretical perspective in the beginning. So what are actually the goals and ends of deliberation? And I said, okay, and I'm actually myself not a fan of epistemic deliberative democracy in the Esalen Landmore style, where it's about getting the facts right or achieving the best results, and more on the reflectiveness end of the spectrum, I guess. But it came from a pretty theoretical perspective. What do we want in deliberation and deliberative processes to happen, particularly when it comes to such contentious topics and complex topics such as climate change, where it's not only about facts, where we cannot only correct misperception and then the world will be just fine. But where we need people to see the other side, to become reflective, to understand others better, but also to understand themselves better, to understand others better, if you get what I mean. And then we break that down into the question, okay, what does actually happen over the course of these climate change deliberations, and how can we measure it with the available survey items? Now, the survey items, they are limited to a certain extent. So we had to complement particularly the reflectiveness measure. Accuracy is not so much an issue with this, trick, and we hope that it's going to work well with the focus groups. I strongly hope that we will be able to, and I think we will be able to gain some insights from these focus groups and from the interviews that we can then code in order to find out how do participants actually perceive their own processes themselves. This is my last slide. With regards to the analytical merits that this analysis, that then at the end of the day, although starting out from a theoretical viewpoint, became quite quantitative. With regards to the analytical merits this analysis has, we have, on the one hand, I think a contribution to a more profound understanding if and how deliberative procedures can be utilized to overcome divides between individuals and societal groups about climate change policy and correct climate change related misperceptions, so in both dimensions. I also think it's a helpful assessment to find out if and to what extent there are trade-offs between knowledge acquisition about climate change and reflectiveness, just from an analytical perspective. And correspondingly, this has practical political implications. So under what conditions are accuracy and reflectiveness promoted? Are they promoted under the same conditions or under different conditions? Then facilitators, designers, charity organizations, governments, whoever initiates those processes would have to think about the question, what do we actually achieve? What are the ends or goals of these deliberative processes? What do we actually want out of them? If a trade-off manifests in our analyses, practitioners must decide which end of deliberation they consider more important, and we have an empirically grounded point of departure to rethink the design and facilitation of deliberative processes that aim at more consequential policy change than we could observe so far. Thank you very much.